Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am one of your hosts, Derick. With me over there is Evan. Good day to you, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All
It's a
right.
naked episode.
It is. It's
Yes.
the naked episode. All right. Genesis
For all
2:25.
our viewers, we debated doing this episode naked. You should be
Yeah,
thankful that we
yeah,
we,
we
we elected
considered.
against that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did. We
We don't
did.
want to be kicked off YouTube, I guess.
We decided to cover our shame. All right. Genesis 2:25. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. This is just a strange verse to include out of nowhere. Clearly, it sets up what we'll see at the end of chapter 3 as they get clothed, if you will. But boy, this verse has led to a lot of different speculation around the nature of what Adam and Eve's sin was and what does this naked mean and all of that. And there's a lot there. So
Right.
it's clearly symbolically important. I think that can be understood for the detail of it being included. So the question is, what is this nakedness? What does this mean? Now, for me, I look here not just at the nakedness, but it's the combination of the nakedness and no shame together. So when I see this, I think what I see here is that it's describing a kind of innocence, right? But it's a particular kind of innocence.
Mhm.
I think there's a tendency for this passage, we talk about it as being as the man and woman here being uncorrupted, unflawed, those things, right? They're not unflawed though, as we'll see in the next chapter, right? Because they do sin, they must have a flaw.
Mhm.
So it's not that their nakedness here implies a purity per se, because they are impure. It just sort of that flaw hasn't emerged yet.
It's
So
not like they put on clothes and then sinned. It's that
right,
they sinned and then they
exactly.
put on
Yeah,
clothes.
yeah, or that they were ashamed and then sinned, right? And so that's the idea here, that we're saying that they lack shame
Mhm.
implies that they should have been ashamed, which
Mhm.
is interesting.
Mhm.
So that the innocence here, it's almost like the innocence of a child being naked, right? Like they just
Mhm.
don't know better.
Yeah.
And when you think about them not knowing better, I think this tying very much to the tree, as we'll see, is that their nakedness yet not being ashamed implies a lack of knowledge, right? They don't have knowledge of the fact that they should be ashamed. The
Mhm.
tree, or their consumption of the fruit of the tree, later gives them that knowledge.
Mhm.
So I think that's the nakedness here, and lack of shame implies a sense of they were naive but weren't self-conscious of their naivete, right?
Mhm.
They didn't know much, but it didn't matter that they didn't know much. They were unaware,
Mhm.
but it didn't matter that they were unaware. They weren't ashamed of that fact.
Mhm. Is there
Um,
vulnerability to it
well,
potentially?
I
Because
mean,
nakedness oftentimes is a position of vulnerability.
so let's get into the actually the next thing I want to mention, because we'll get right into vulnerability. Because the
Uh-huh.
word naked here, the Hebrew, it's arumum. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's what it looks like.
It's what
Yeah,
looks like a room.
yeah, and that sounds similar to shrewd, which is arum, which relates very specifically to the serpent in the next verse. So this gets to what you were saying, because I think
Oh,
what we
this
can
because the
take
serpent
away,
was the shrewdest of all.
yes,
Connect that.
yes,
The serpent was the shrewdest of all animals.
right, right. And so
Yeah.
what I think we might be able to take away from that is that there's something about the shrewdness of the serpent that
Hmm.
allows it to recognize the nakedness and take advantage of it. And
Yeah.
so that pun of these words being similar here does seem to signal, right, that a state of nakedness leaves
Hmm.
one vulnerable to shrewdness. So it
Hmm.
does, I think, very much get to what you're saying, that there's a vulnerability to it. The innocence can be taken advantage of. I think that's very much something that is captured in this idea of nakedness.
Well, and at risk of, well, I don't mind, I guess, having a more historical perspective, but at risk of looking at it through a physical lens too, there's nakedness is a vulnerability, and it's a vulnerability to something like a snake.
Yes.
Like we oftentimes wear boots and shoes and things like that to potentially defer things from biting us at that level.
A much greater concern where you live than I, for sure.
Oh man, I ran into one the other day on a trail. It scared me. I'm terrified of snakes.
Colorado, for
listeners. Out here in Colorado. Yeah. Very rather terrifying. It was probably a normal garden snake, but I'm a complete wuss. So I was like, I made a big giant run around away from it. I was walking through tall grass. I haven't gone back yet. Anyways, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, they are a risk, and so especially, and considering where this is the audience and where this this originates, if we're talking about the Near East, that's or Middle East, that's a place where you run that risk too.
Yes, giant risk there.
A lot of desert snakes and things like that. So nakedness is fundamentally a huge vulnerability, and something that something like that can take advantage of.
Right. And you're almost foolish for going around naked, right?
Exactly.
You should be ashamed of it, but yet they're not, right?
Well, shame is a weird word.
Well, it is. I think we'll probably.
I would think unafraid. Unafraid would be what I would think would be there if we're following along this vulnerability track.
So, yes, but is there not something of shame tied into our fear? Because if we're afraid, we're not necessarily courageous, and there's something shaming, I guess, about not being courageous. That those two are sort of inverse of each other, and so I think it's they are not being courageous in their nakedness. It's not like they're doing this out of courage. They're just simply unashamed. They're simply out there. It's not they don't know that they should be afraid. They don't know that they should be courageous either. They know neither thing. They're just there. I think that's kind of what the unashamed is getting at.
So maybe ignorant. Or oblivious.
Oblivious, yeah, both those things. If you knew you're naked, you're ashamed. Once you recognize, I guess the point is this, right? The nakedness, I think a lot of it wraps into the idea of human frailty, right? And I think that's a part of what's captured in the idea of nakedness is innocence, but also limitation, right? When you look at it, when you look at yourself in the mirror naked, and you see that's all there is to see, right? That's what there is, and the limitations, the frailty of humanity is on display, right? You don't look as impressive as a gorilla, right? In terms of musculature and ability to do things. You don't look as sleek as a cheetah or whatever, right? You don't look as fierce as a lion. All the frailty of humanity is on display, and in a way that sort of lack of capacity that is so evident is kind of something that feels shaming in a way.
Well, unlike all those other animals too, we expose all of this, which is vital organs,
right?
And for listeners, all of the front of our chest and our pelvis and things like that, all that, not pelvis, but the torso, all of that contains vital organs. Whereas all of those other animals are hunched over on all fours, and all of those vital organs are protected by typically their teeth.
Right.
Or if you're talking about primates, other primates, you're talking about they can reach out with their hands and they can stand up, but they primarily travel with all of that protected. Whereas we don't do that. We are fully exposed whenever in our normal positions.
So let's take that a step further
naked state
with what we've talked about in terms of trees as well, like the idea of reaching towards the heavens. Right? Because humans, not hunched over, not to the ground, not protecting themselves in that way. Humans are standing up. They're reaching towards the heavens, right? In a way with our posture. But that leaves us exposed. That makes us more frail in a way, right? Makes us more vulnerable. And thus, in terms of fitness in a material sense, right? In terms of our ability to just fit in the world, there's something to be ashamed of, I guess, in a way, right? In that sort of material sense, right? The reaching towards the heaven leaves us frail and vulnerable and ashamed of our sort of weakness for this task of surviving in the world.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean don't do it. We still are meant to reach for the heavens, but as we'll see here, our protection as we reach towards the heavens, we'll see at the end of chapter 3, comes from God.
Yeah.
They were unaware, I guess, of how exposed they were by reaching towards the heavens. That's maybe one of the things that we could capture in terms of their being unashamed. Unashamed also more or less means unaware in this sense, right? Yeah. So they are unaware of how exposed they are as they reach towards the heavens, thus setting up what we're going to see in chapter 3 with the serpent.
Yeah.
You're obviously more vulnerable, and they're unaware of their vulnerability.
Yeah.
That comes from reaching towards the heavens.
Is there something to potentially that unashamedness too? Because we've talked about this progression of humanity, almost as a species, from infant to adult, and this progression that's happening, this maturity. There's a way in which infants are this way. Infants.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Infants are naked and unashamed, and to a certain age, they are fine with running around naked, and that comes with time, that they phase out of that part of their
they suddenly recognize that they don't want to do that. They become ashamed of that. Still waiting for my oldest daughter to get there. She's almost one of these days.
One of these days.
I don't know.
She's gonna eat the fruit. I don't know.
I guess, yeah. One of these days she'll not run around naked. No idea. She is ready for a bath at any time. So all right, one last thing to bring up in regards to this verse too. We get a chapter break here. We've talked about how verses, numbers, those aren't in the original text, but the chapter break here does make sense, because I think this verse very clearly brings an end to this section of the narrative, right? And it sets up like a state of things. Then the last state of things is humans were reaching towards the heavens, but because they're rooted in the earth, that does create a sense of vulnerability and innocence and unawareness and all of that. And this is the state that they were in. Along comes the serpent. So we're not told that, there's no, I mean, again, going to speculation and people trying to take this literally. Some people speculate this, the next verse happens almost immediately. Other people would say it was years before this next verse happened. Again, we're not sort of taking it in that strict historical sense, and there's no explanation of how long this status quo goes on. But this is the status quo in which our sort of antagonist here in this section, the serpent, into which the serpent is injected. But this sort of state of being of humanity in Eden, that sense, like I'm sort of reminded here of the idea of the way back in Genesis 1-2, the sort of formless, void, chaotic state of the world prior to God's bringing light. That was sort of a status quo. We talked about it being same kind of idea here, right? Here's the status quo of things in absence of sin. And then now we're going to see, we are seeing now actually a little bit of the deconstruction of what we saw there, right? Because we saw the chaos and then God bringing order. And we've seen that continue all the way up until this verse. And then after this verse, we're going to see sort of like the return of disorder. That's what will begin in the next section. So I just wanted to highlight it is very clearly sort of the end of a movement in this narrative. So all right, with that, be sure to like, subscribe, follow Visit our website and sign up for our mailing list. Email us unschooltheology@protonmail.com. Leave a review, share it with your friends, all those things, and we will see you next time. Thanks.